Great. Thank you so much, Jen, and welcome everybody. My name is Fiona Wilson. I'm the Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer here at the University of New Hampshire, and I'm also Director of our Sustainability Institute. It's truly my pleasure and honor to moderate this conversation today about women in philanthropy. And we are joined by three incredible UNH alums, as well as a leader here from UNH. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists just to very briefly introduce themselves so that you know who we're going to be in conversation with today. So Sarah, if you wouldn't mind going first.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I was a transfer student to UNH, but I ended up graduating in 1979 as a sociology major. I went on to a 25-year career in financial services with Fidelity Investments. And then I built on that with 10 additional years in the philanthropic roles, leading the Fidelity Charitable Gift Fund and their private family foundation. As a retiree, I currently serve as a board member of the UNH Foundation to raise the private funds to support the operations of the school and its students. Thank you.
Great, Sarah. Thanks so much for being with us today and for all of your volunteer work at UNH. Victoria.
Hello. Also, welcome everyone. I am a graduate, 78 graduate of UNH. I started as a French education major. My father asked me what on earth I thought I was going to do with that. And I realized I didn't want to teach and didn't have a better plan. And transferred to the business school, which is served me well for all of my career. And then luckily for me, I'd had an internship advisor who had gone to Children's Hospital between the time that I interned and was looking for my first career opportunity. And when I called him to say, I'll do anything to work at Children's Hospital, he said, great, you can have a job in the fundraising office. And there I have launched my career. So 43 years later, I am the Chief Development Officer of Mass Audubon. I spent the first 20 inside nonprofits, the next 20 as a consultant, and back inside now and having a wonderful time. So thank you for having me.
That's great. I love that journey, Victoria. Thank you so much for being with us. And Ali, if you'd like to go next.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Ali Ladio. I graduated in the class of 07 from UNH. I did the business school as well and focused on entrepreneurship. And at the time had no idea what I was going to do, but I did have a college job as working at the UNH Phonathon. And so that's, at the time, had no idea I'd end up doing fundraising as my career. It was just a fun, really wonderful job to have. And I loved calling alums, and I didn't mind asking for money. So I guess later, a few years down the line, I said, that was actually kind of fun. And I decided to dive right in. And I continued my fundraising career at Boston University, which is where I received my MBA as well. And before you know it, I've been fundraising for over 12 years now, mostly in the education space, higher ed and private schools. Right now I'm working at Catalyst Family Inc., which is a California statewide childcare organization. I also have been doing a lot of consulting, starting up a little collaborative here in Central California with a colleague of mine, and working with smaller nonprofits to do nonprofit fundraising consulting as well. So glad to be here in this great company.
Thanks you, Ali, so much. Great to see you and have you on this webinar today. And last but no means least, Debbie Dutton.
Hey everyone, great to see you all, and glad we have a good turnout for this conversation. I'm honored to be here with the fellow women on the screen, so appreciate the opportunity to participate. I'm in my 10th year at UNH as Vice President for Advancement, and before that worked at Colby College and was with a number of the Harvard teaching hospitals in Boston, so have been in both healthcare and in educational philanthropy. I got into philanthropy in the early 90s and never left, just loved it. Felt so honored and lucky to be able to work with amazing philanthropists who wanted to achieve great things, and have been blessed with a career of achieving all sorts of wonderful things with great partners. And that is no different here at UNH. We completed several years ago the largest campaign in UNH's history. The pride that our alumni feel in this institution is astounding and continues to grow. And we are on to greater things. And it is heartening, I will say, in every place I've worked, to see what the power of philanthropy can achieve. So I'm excited to talk more with all of you today.
Yeah, that's a great segue, Debbie, I think, in terms of the power of philanthropy. It speaks a little bit about why we're having this conversation today. I'm going to direct a series of some questions to our panelists, and then we will have plenty of time for Q&A from the audience. So just wanted to let you know, if you have a question at any time, please just put it into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And we will get to those questions in about 25 minutes or so. But I'm going to start with a question, a sort of a big picture question, which really, I think, builds on Debbie's introduction. And I'll direct it to you, Sarah. Why are we even having this conversation? Why does women's philanthropy and women in philanthropy, why do those things matter? Just need to unmute yourself, Sarah.
No. Well, on the face of it, we can all just think about how the women right here are having vibrant careers. We're more in the workplace. We have more means, etc. But then you also read the headlines about the generational transfer that is occurring for baby boomers. And, some studies basically say that by the year 2030, the 30 trillion in assets that will be available will be more commanded by women. Currently, that's about 10 trillion of the assets in this country are really directed by women, and that's about to change. So with women living longer and the concept of potentially inheriting twice, inheriting from our parents as well as potentially a spouse, women are just going to have more of the financial means in their control. So I think that's one of the big picture items to keep in mind as we go forward in this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Victoria, Ali, Debbie, anything you wanted to add to that about why does women's philanthropy matter? Or
Sarah, maybe this is a good time to play off one thought for me. The other reason that I think it matters is that women make their decisions and give differently. And so I think for all of us, as we sort of careen into this transfer of wealth, and I'm seeing it every day already in my workplace, I think it's just a good heads up to all of us to give, there's head and there's heart, right? And I think we need to pay attention to the fact that women do think differently, and women do behave differently, and women do give differently. And so for all of us, that's just an eye-opener to how we think forward about ourselves as donors and ourselves as professionals in nonprofits.
Absolutely. I mean, there are plenty of studies that have been done over the past 10 years that indicate that women give more with their heart than their head, not exclusively. Generalizations about being more having more empathy, wanting to be more collaborative, and tend to give to more organizations, and when they give more dollars. So that's just a powerful set of dynamics that are at play here.
Yeah, would agree.
Thank you, Sarah. That's some really interesting data. Victoria, maybe I'll sort of pivot to you. Can you talk a little bit on the other side of this about how women are playing a central role and becoming sort of more dominant in today's nonprofit landscape? You're back now at a nonprofit. Love to hear you just talk a little bit more about women's leadership in the field of philanthropy.
Sure.
As leaders of organizations.
Sure. we can't see you all out there, so I assume we're talking to a largely female audience, but I don't know that for certain. So one thing I would say, Fiona, is I think I shared this when we were preparing, which is when I started my first job as a development officer at Children's Hospital, I polled the Boston nonprofits. And literally almost every one of the most significant nonprofits was led by a male. So they were female-dominated staffs, but the leadership were largely men. And, you know, having square shoulders as I have, I immediately thought that's interesting and a tad unfair. Let me see what that's about over the course of my career. So really what I could say now, 40 years later, is that's not the case at all. If you hold those exact same, as Debbie says, academic medical institutions and, you know, significantly complex higher ed institutions, you see many, many, many more women. Now, women leaders dominate the field to a great extent, at least on the Northeast corridor. So I think that's a great phenomenon. I could also speak personally about how rewarding it's been for me. So I love that Debbie said, you know, there's nothing better. I tell my 4 girls every day, I've loved going to work every single day of my life because I either meet a phenomenal human being and a philanthropist or a colleague inside a nonprofit, or because, you know, an organization just, you know, Pine Street Inn just opened a new transitional housing program, or, you know, just things that make my heart sing. So it's really rewarding, I think, as a profession. And I think some of the things that Sarah started to talk about are things we're really, really seeing. Like one observation I have is that family foundations, which are coming onto the landscape at breakneck speed with the transfer of wealth, women have much, much more active roles in getting those set up, in figuring out what their priorities are going to be. And that leads us automatically to now being on, you know, back on the staff side of the desk. We're calling women. Can I say for the first 10 years of my life, I don't think I called a woman to make an appointment. I called the man, the equation. And I love now that, you know, they're showing up in our offices, they're dominant at the table, they're making decisions. Sometimes, you know, they have the full authority, and sometimes it's a little, you know, hey, it's my turn to make a decision and I'd like to do X. So however it's playing out, it's really been fantastic to be a professional in this field right now.
Yeah, Debbie and Sarah, you've both been in this field for not trying to sort of say you're old, but you've both been in these fields for a couple of decades at least as well. How have you seen things shifting in terms of women's roles in philanthropic organizations?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to jump in. One of the things that I've really been gratified to participate in and to have a hand in is making sure that our leadership boards are more gender balanced. So when I was with some of the Harvard teaching hospitals, it wasn't unusual to have a governing board be 80% or 90% male. And while I certainly agree with Victoria that the leadership at the vice president level certainly is better than it used to be, I just anecdotally was on a call yesterday with some really large universities across the country. It's a VP connecting group, and it was still lots of men at the top, and you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but still I think we have some more work to do in terms of making sure women are really at the head of some of those really large educational institutions. But the board work has been incredibly rewarding, and we've had good success at UNH in finding and building relationships with really strong female leaders, one who happens to be on this call. But that's been rewarding. It's not always been something that we've been able to achieve. And so I've really appreciated that. And I've appreciated having my most recent board chair was a female leader. and her style, her approach, the things that she challenged me on and questioned me about, and got us to think about. It was certainly different than other female leaders and other male leaders, but have appreciated that ability to work with strong female leaders in the volunteer leadership sector.
Ali, you graduated about 15 years ago, so a little bit more recently, not so recently these days, but a little more recently.
Thanks for making me feel young. That's been a little while.
Yeah. What are you seeing? I mean, you entered your career right out of university here into philanthropy. What are you seeing as somebody sort of 10, 15 years into your career?
Well, I think something I've noticed on this, it's still, it's been more common in fundraising. There are a lot of women in fundraising, not necessarily in the philanthropist position in my circle, but a lot of fundraisers that I know. And so there's a lot more comfort in how to talk about it, talking about money. I also know people in my generation and women in my generation are becoming the ones interested in investing, the ones interested in being completely confident in our own finances, and sort of seeing that shift of, my parents didn't necessarily teach me how to do this. I'm going to have to figure this out myself. I'm not going to trust a potential husband or guy to figure this all out for me. So there are a lot more resources for that sort of thing, which is really exciting. And I know a lot of my peers care a lot about that, about being completely aware and on top of the family budget. And I know that's actually been common for a long time, is whoever is bringing in the money, there's often the woman is the one spending it, so it's another form of making donations, is another form of choosing how to spend the money, whether it's this amount goes to the grocery store, this amount goes to the kids' school, and this amount will be for our philanthropy. So it seems like for a long time, that's been how it's been slowly shifting. And now it's just becoming even more obvious that there's more power there, there's more money there. And so that's exciting to see. And I also think that women for a long time have been moving into leadership roles in fundraising, in philanthropy, because of things like events and circles of friends and the way that you kind of shape your society and your friend circle. And so if you're the one confident about the giving that you're doing and you're becoming more confident in how to talk about it, you're making huge changes in philanthropy in your own little community. So even those that aren't technically in a leadership role in a philanthropy can really make a big difference by just talking about where you're giving or sharing or bringing up those conversations in circles of friends, which is exciting too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd love to bring it back sort of a little bit to where we started and sort of dig a little bit deeper. It's clear to all of us, I'm sure everyone on this webinar as well, that we are at a pretty profound moment in human history. We're in the middle of a climate crisis, an existential climate crisis. We have a global reckoning with racial injustice and income inequality, wealth inequality, the list goes on. But these are big global challenges of our time. It seems to me that philanthropy is more important now than ever. I'd love just to hear a little bit more. Maybe we'll start with you, Ali. What are some of the ways that you see women's philanthropy really benefiting and influencing society and culture and communities? Like, how is it tangibly having an impact?
Sure. Well, I think, I like that segue. I think that one thing that is becoming a little bit more that people are leading into now, or at least in the philanthropy sphere, that people are trying to make it into a movement, is the fact that philanthropists should be shifting from gatekeepers that hold all the power to actually the allies of the communities that they're serving. And so by that, things like showing trust in the people of the community, showing trust that in the organization that's doing the work. Oftentimes the people that are closest to the issues at hand and that are being affected are women. So when you're a woman with the philanthropic power to make change, and then you're going to trust the organization or the community to do what they need to do with that funding, that can make huge change and make a big difference. So I'm hoping that over time that'll become more common. Things like simpler grant applications, simpler reporting requirements for the funding, showing showing trust by saying, here's your gift and you can have it for 5 years. You don't have to worry about reapplying every year. And, there are so many barriers that small organizations have to go through to get funding. And so as women who are shown to be a little bit more empathetic for the communities they're serving, a little bit more trusting of the organizations they're giving to, if that keeps being a new wave, I'm hoping that movement will help create just more funding for the organizations that need it. So that's one thing.
Yeah, what you're really saying is sort of more ability to focus on the work itself rather than
Exactly. Get the money out there and let the work happen. That's the goal.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe that trust factor is formed, Ali, as you've alluded to, by the women's tendency to be more collaborative, and it's definitely been proven that women do more volunteering. And if you do volunteering or other ways to get to know an organization and get to know the leadership, you are doing a form of due diligence. This does not have to be reading balance sheets and financial reports and things like that to count as really meaningful due diligence on understanding how the organization operates, its mission, and how they deliver on it. And that just gives you more confidence to give and give more. And, a 5-year unrestricted gift is incredibly important to these organizations, especially smaller ones. And you would still want to keep tabs on leadership and, if there are leadership changes and things like that. But treating it like a shared endeavor with the organization versus, you owe me because I'm giving to you, is a concept that I think that comes through with women philanthropists.
Yeah, it's a really great
Sarah,
point.
maybe if I could for a minute, Fiona, I'll pick up on that and say this, because we led with sort of this concept of head and heart, but I don't want to sort of underplay the head part of it at all.
Not at all.
Right. And so I'm thinking back, so, I'm having these conversations every day with, fairly significant donors. And you got me thinking about, well, if I compared and contrasted a series of conversations, I would have said a few things. One is, now that I have landed at Mass Audubon, Fiona, climate change is my big agenda. So I'm knee deep in doing something that had been sort of viewed as a science or a male-dominated field of study or even body of knowledge. And I'm just thinking, women are really pouring themselves into understanding. They're making it important to understand these things, and they're asking really, really good, deep questions. So I wouldn't want anybody to think we're saying, they give us a pass. That's certainly, I go through my paces just as ardently and sometimes more ardently, I think, when I'm dealing with a woman philanthropist. So I find that intriguing. I think I would say our female donors tend to listen more to, maybe they're more willing to hear a president or a chief executive or a VP map their agenda or their strategy and then ask their questions, as opposed to arrive with a predisposed notion about what they might want to achieve. So that changes how they give a little bit too. The other thing is, women are making huge gifts these days. I mean, there's this courage in women's philanthropy that Mackenzie Scott or Laureen Powell Jobs, or, you can think about it on, that's a grand scale, but you can find it everywhere in your communities that, they're being bold and courageous and making really big philanthropic investments. And it just gets everybody to pay attention differently. I think women have an aha moment, like, oh, I can, I can do this too, which I love seeing. So I think all of our gift tables are stronger for women these days.
Absolutely. Ali or Debbie, anything you wanted to add to this idea of how how women's philanthropy is really sort of shifting some of our big global challenges, really making an impact in the world.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, Allie. I don't know if you want to add something too. I do think that there's a different emphasis when you're working with a woman philanthropist. She may have interests that are more focused on the greater good and social challenges in different ways. Certainly men are too. One difference I would say with women, and it's a little bit off topic, but as Victoria was talking, it's difficult for me to remember a time where I worked exclusively with an advisor when the donor was a male. Normally that's a very one-on-one relationship, and I can count on many fingers how many times I've worked through advisors with women. The women tend to just approach it differently, and it's a different way of us thinking about how we do our job. So whether that's an attorney or a financial planner, there is more of a team approach, I find, with women, which is, as a professional, both rewarding and can sometimes be challenging, depending on how the lines of communication flow, what the expertises are of those advisors. But I just think that's a nuance as we're thinking about how women may approach philanthropy. That is a much more common, in my experience, to have that team approach with women. And so I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. Sort of a related topic, I think, there's so many conversations happening around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion today, as they should be. And there's a lot of conversations happening, how much progress we're actually making towards addressing racial inequality and racial injustice. I'm not sure. I'd love to hear from each of you around sort of how the landscape of philanthropy really has the power to sort of shift DEI issues. What are some of the things that you're all thinking about, Victoria, in your organization? How are you thinking about diversity on your board, for example? Sarah, and the work that you're doing, UNH Foundation, Ali, in your organization. How are you thinking about DEI, and what's the potential for philanthropy to really make some tangible impact on DEI? Maybe start with you, perhaps, Ali?
Sure. Well, one thing that I'm seeing as a fundraiser, of course, is just how much, how a lot more is being asked of organizations in terms of, and rightfully so, in terms of being transparent, being able to show, is your leadership representing your community? What efforts are you taking? If you're in education, are you educating the children that you have, that you're working with to be more aware and helpful in this space? If you're serving communities that are primarily of any certain race, are you then representing those on your board and in your leadership? Because you should be. And so that's really exciting for me to see that that's being expected. And I know that it's actually really challenging organizations that aren't quite up to speed, because there's a lot of opportunities out there for grants that are specifically targeting that area now, and I love to see it. But an organization is sometimes having to really flounder and figure it out quickly if they want to have access to that funding. And so it's just a learning opportunity that I am excited to see. I think that, I don't have the exact stat, but as we can all imagine, about 90% of foundation CEOs are white men, something like that, or at least just white. I forget if it was men. Seems like it could be men. And so it's just one of those things that is starting to have to change. I think everyone's looking at their boards a little differently. Everyone's looking at how to make sure that there are different voices at the table. And it does play in similarly to a lot of the conversations we've been having today about women too, just how we need to be looking at the communities we're serving, making sure that the conversations and the leadership around culture are all supporting these initiatives. So it's not going to be a quick answer, but a lot of what I'm seeing is going in the right direction, I think.
Sarah and Debbie, I know you're obviously both deeply involved in the UNH Foundation. love just to hear a little bit about how the UNH Foundation is thinking about DEI.
Well, I'll just comment and reinforce what Ali was saying, that leadership really needs to be speaking to the community that it's serving. And when I look out on the landscape at different organizations that I follow, large community foundations in Boston and New York, they've been recently installed Black leaders, specifically in this case, but looking at how that continues to evolve is heartening for me. And then personally, me thinking about how years ago now, my husband and I thinking about making our first significant gift to UNH, we landed on wanting to fund scholarship for underrepresented students in STEM. And by underrepresented, we were hoping to tackle gender and racial diversity, and hoping that could, we've been able to realize some of the benefits of that. And Debbie, I'll toss it over to you to talk more about anything relative to the foundation, et cetera.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, and I would say just kind of a compare and contrast with earlier in my career and certainly the past year and a half, just a greater emphasis on DEI as a very important and worthy place to invest. And so I can remember 15 years ago working for a very wonderful, esteemed institution with amazing donors, enlightened, amazing philanthropists, and just really tough to get some traction around some of these issues. And as I think you called it, Fiona, our global reckoning has just shown this really bright light on something that's been of worthy, a place of worthy support for many, many, many decades, right? But now it's something that people are waking up to, that I need to invest here. I can make a difference. I can have an impact. And so that I think is just fantastic. I don't know that that's unique to what UNH is experiencing. I think many institutions are experiencing this right now as well. But just in terms of a perspective during my career, I think Sarah used the word heartening, that we are really investing some of our philanthropic resources to deal with these issues that need to be dealt with. So.
Yeah, I guess that, in contrast, one thing that I came upon recently were some statistics about where females had to rank order, the top problems that needed to be solved. And when I look at that, by the way, 45% said the top issue to solve is hunger. So 34% said access to basic health services, and then developing treatment and cures for diseases. Those were in the double digits. Down under racial discrimination, 13% of women ranked that as a top problem, and 8% said gender inequality. I would argue that that tells me that philanthropy isn't to solve everything. You could be saying, well, I don't see philanthropy having to solve the gender inequality problem. How about corporate? How about other entities? So it's just I wanted to really highlight some of that, or some of those findings along the lines of women tend to think of the big social problems and wanting to tackle them, like hunger. 45% of women said that was the top thing, and 34% of men said that, for example. But when I was really looking at it for those other reasons, I thought, yeah, well, philanthropy doesn't have to be the leader in solving everything. So I take that. I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what sectors are best suited to solve which issues, right?
Yeah, and just like, people who are joining this webinar could be thinking that we're here to say that women philanthropists only want to fund things that fuel, whether it's gender inequality or women entrepreneurs and things like that. And certainly there are organizations like women's funding networks and et cetera that have existed for years. That's not what women philanthropists necessarily fund. There's probably a piece of the pie that goes towards that, but it's society at large.
Yeah, I mean, what you're speaking to is really, sort of dignity and well-being for all human beings, right? I mean, hunger, access to education, access to healthcare, they are their core. They're actually core tenets of sustainability. That's the world that I help lead here at UNH. And
well, and they're very intertwined in a way. So, you also can say women who want to solve for hunger, you can't solve for hunger without inherently understanding the issues of underrepresentation, or,
of course,
that whole kind of thing. I think, Sarah, the way I read what you just said, which is exactly what I find too, is it's not their point of entry that's not what they arrive at the table with necessarily, but it very much sits underneath the other issues that they decide to, try to solve for. The other thing that I was going to say, just coming again from a professional in the nonprofit sector, as Debbie does, is, also, as much as I wish, and believe me, I wish we could snap our fingers and say we all know how to do this well, be a welcoming environment for diversity and whatever definition of diversity we hold. I have to say the last few years have been personally rewarding, just going through the journey of self-awareness, personal self-awareness, organizational self-awareness, recognizing, that it will help all of us to think differently about how we present ourselves and our organizations. And then I think we will start to see more donors who sit at the top of philanthropic circles. I mean, I think we're starting to see it, but it's like teeny tiny tip of the iceberg. But I so look forward to the days when it's, when we're able to say it's not just women, but women of color sitting
Yes.
as tables, or we have a ways to go there. But I would love to encourage our audience to say, one thing I notice is there is really not enough diversity in fundraising professionals. And if you're sitting out there, or any other career you could have in a nonprofit, quite frankly, if you're sitting out there as a relatively young grad or even a mid-career grad, I hope you really recognize the nonprofit world as a place that you can sink into career-wise, and, help yourselves and help all of us.
Yes. Well, I think that's so well said, Victoria. And I think that's a great transition into some questions. We've got some questions coming in from the audience, so I'd love to sort of go over to those questions now. There's a question here that said, completely connected to what you just said, Victoria, which is, what would your advice be to a woman entering the field of philanthropy today?
As a profession? Is that what
yes,
that the way you interpret that?
Yes, I think for women.
Well, one thing I would say, this may not be what they intended, but one of the things I would have said is, my personal story is that my husband died very young, and I ended up single parenting, my family. It's a good profession. I would say, if you are going to enter it, it's a good, solid profession where women can make a decent salary and living at this, not across the board. I think nonprofit gets a bad rap, as it's every nonprofit pays pitiful amounts of money. And I think there is, I would say, consider it a real serious career path where you can achieve intellectually, you can achieve emotionally, and you can achieve financially as well, or at least satisfy what you need to to do financially.
Yeah, I think that's great,
So,
great advice.
you know,
Advice is do it. Yeah.
Go ahead, Ali, please.
No, I was just gonna, it's in summary, it's don't be afraid. I kind of like I always, when someone's trying to learn more about it, and just ask me what it's like, I'm like, people think of fundraising and they kind of jump to the scary part of asking for money, eek, but that's clearly such a small part of it. It's a mix of so many fun things. It can be a mix of PR, communications, event planning, or any piece or part of that sort of thing. And so that's obviously sort of the sales pitch on it. But what I would say to do if you're kind of new to the field is get one of those really great, there's plenty of these jack of all trades jobs. There's always the associate, the coordinator, the starting job where you can try to get your hands in as many projects and things as possible. I know when I was getting started, I had a role that was very niche in a program, and that was great because I got to really focus on it and dive in and be successful. But then soon after, I had more of an associate role where I was kind of a part of everything, and it was overwhelming, but it really gave me a better taste of what area I wanted to dive into. So I guess that's true for many careers, but just try to really get your feel for it at the beginning and have a lot of conversations with a lot of different people in the position. I think people will be willing to share their experience, but I've had a great time with it. So I
love that sort of, trying on many different hats within the field of philanthropy.
Yeah. And if I can add to that, I agree with everything Victoria and Ali have said. I think there's a pretty significant business proposition here. This is about investing resources, right? So our profession is becoming much more sophisticated, much more thought of an investment, right? We try not to use the words charity. You're investing to make change, and it is broadening, I think, the horizons of what we can achieve. And I will say, for those of you, any of you who are local on this webinar, Women in Development, we haven't talked yet about why there is such a thing called Women in Development, but there is. It's a Boston-based group, which I joined many, many years ago. Job security, that listing every month is never more than 4 full pages, never less than 4 full pages of open jobs. I mean, it is, as institutions and organizations think about diversifying their revenue streams, philanthropy is such an important component of that business model. It has been a booming profession ever since I've been in it. And so talk about job security and opportunities for growth. It is just all there.
Right. So Debbie, I'm going to build on that. I have to make a little plug for this. So that my consulting firm, Development Guild, where I was until very recently, ran an executive search practice. And we used to say it's a war for women. Like literally, it's a war for talent in the fundraising world. And any of you who have a skill, do not undersell how well you could shape your career right now.
I love that. Yes. There's a question here that really resonates with me as somebody who leads some work at UNH, and we're always fundraising for our work in sustainability. So this question really resonates with me, and I'm really curious about what your answers are. So the question is, donors often love new things, but organizational sustainability is critical to the capacity to create new things. So unrestricted funds are so critical. Are there gender differences in this arena or understanding?
I can try. I mean, what I think is interesting, it reminds me of the the sort of trust conversation we were having earlier. So I don't know what the stats might be. I know plenty of men and women that would want to give to something really specific, because as a donor who, actually I'd say it has more to do with being a savvy donor or not, your experience in giving. If at first you're like, I just want to give something specific because I want to see it and I want it to be tangible. But the more that donors start to learn about the organizations they're serving, and like we were saying, maybe women are a little bit more likely to get volunteer and get in there and learn the people. And then hopefully they are more likely to give to that unrestricted place. So I don't know whether it's true, but I would have this underlying assumption that over time, women would be more likely to give to in that unrestricted, trusting way. And of course, as a fundraiser, I'm always hoping for those unrestricted gifts too, but we all know there's sort of ways around it to kind of package the ways to kind of get that unrestricted budget relieving funding that you need the most, while packaging it in a way that's appealing to donors so that they feel like they're giving something really tangible. So
yeah, I'd build on what Allie's saying there. I think that's a really important component. My experience is that we as professionals place far too much emphasis on the new. I think that's much more of a reflection of us and our colleagues, that we want to do new and we try to sell new, when the reality is the mission, that what we need to accomplish and how we are approaching our donors really has a tremendous impact on how we get funded. So I don't disagree with Allie, but I put more of the emphasis on us as professionals, and having worked in institutions where there was much more of an emphasis on budget relief. Now, no one wants to hear that word, but internally as a budget model and a business model, there are some realities that we all have to work within as professionals. It's our job then to think about how we engage with our donors in ways that makes our mission exciting, that makes what we're trying to achieve really worthy of investments. I found in my work, much of it is us and our colleagues always like, oh, what's new? We have to sell new. It's got to be new. And that's just wrong. We as a really need to.
You're 100,
totally
you're 100% right. We were, sorry, Allie. We were just talking about that this morning, where I was saying to two of my team members, so a donor was pushing back on them. That's something they had said, and I could watch them saying, okay, well, rather than push my issue, I'll offer them something else, something else, something else. And I was like, no, we have to be brave and say that if we do not do our core work, then it does not matter how many new things we layer and pile on top of it. We have to be strong at our core.
Well said. Sarah, I think you were going to offer something.
Yes, I think that you also used the term capacity building in that question that was phrased. And sometimes my experience in this area, I think of the capacity building needs of an organization are, let's just call it sort of the back office, behind the scenes, operational, non-sexy stuff that really needs to get done. And you can invest in a new database that can allow the staff to be much more efficient, for example. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, one of the changes that we may be in the middle of is less need for women to fund new programming and new buildings to have their name out there, and maybe more willing to fund the behind the scenes things in a quieter way. I'm not sure about that, but it resonates with me anyway. So
I think it's an interesting segue into one of the other questions here from the audience. The question is, it's a statement, I guess. Men seem to have flashy giving with a lot of publicity and recognition. Women seem quieter about their giving. Is that true, or is that in fact just too stereotypical? And I can't help but be thinking about Mackenzie Scott, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, and the giving she's been doing recently seems very sort of different, perhaps. Love people's comments on that question.
Well, I wouldn't mind saying this. I think women don't have same need for their names on buildings, and more, if it is, it's because a husband is making an honor, a gift that, they want to honor their mom or their wife or whoever. But I do think if you think about Mackenzie Scott is a good example, she is getting a lot of airtime and play for what she's doing. So I think women want to be recognized as philanthropy. I just think their measure of how they're recognized is not necessarily a pillar with their name on it. It's got a deeper connotation to recognition. That would be my own and I think that's true with a lot of the women philanthropists I work with all the time too. It's important they're noticed as part of the equation, but not, we don't have to wear t-shirts emblazoned with their names.
And Mackenzie Scott the airtime is, well, at least what I've saw was focused on how differently she went about.
Yes, exactly.
You know, doing her research and choosing her organizations to fund and how she funded, and didn't she do a lot of unrestricted?
No strings attached, no strings attached. 3 of our clients got funding from her, no strings attached. She did ask that you present a plan of what you will do with the gifts, but no directed.
I think we've seen a trend, you know, for the past decade anyway, of less emphasis on bricks and mortar and name.
I do too.
Male or female, right? So that's
Right.
a trend that's been happening for quite some time, that donors of both genders, I almost said all genders, donors of both genders really think about programmatic and where they want to see change and where they want to see an impact. And it's less about the bricks and mortar, which, you know, there's need to both, right? As we talked about, there's need to both, but digging in deeper as a partner, which I think is an incredibly important and beneficial way of looking at philanthropy. I feel like that's increased all around. We have many more substantive conversations now, and it's much more about what can we accomplish together. So I think that some of the trends that we've been talking about certainly fit the female gender, but at the same time, I think that's a trend overall, that women and men are just much more interested in having this be a partnership and less about, I want a big building with my name on it. I think those days are really gone.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue, Debbie, to a question that somebody in the audience posted. Perhaps we'll end on this question, which is, can you speak about how women can engage most effectively with philanthropy connected to UNH specifically?
There you go.
Sarah, you serve on the UNH Foundation. Maybe you could start that question.
Well, gosh, you know, when I think about my greatest satisfaction as a philanthropist, it's just having a strong human connection to where I've given. And so if you're an UNH alum and you have any affection for the university, that's a great starting point. I also, you know, don't know the age of the folks that we're talking to right now, but if you are in a company and not aware of what the match program is that your company might offer, please seek that out. Sometimes it's kind of hidden on the internal websites and such. And that is a great way to figure out how to make your first gifts to the university with some leverage. I like to always say getting involved where you can volunteer is one of the most meaningful ways to just get started with an organization. So if there's a UNH chapter in your area that allows you to commingle with alumni and whatnot, to me, that's a nice way to stay connected and to fuel your interest in learning more about what's going on at UNH, what the new programs are, emphasis areas that need funding, et cetera. But Debbie, I'll pitch it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, I thought you did a great job. I don't know that I have much to add. Volunteering, you know, we always need volunteers. And like Sarah said, it's just a great way to get to know the university and to have that relationship, and hopefully you have that warm spot, and all of that comes together and inspires you, right? We talk about that a lot. We want to inspire people and inspire philanthropy. So that was great, Sarah. Thank you.
I can add a note just about what it's like to do that. I haven't done too much, but just making myself available and saying that I'll be happy to help on the day of giving, or, you know, emailing and reaching out to a batch of alums. It's just sort of a pitch for just go for it, see what you can do. Nobody's gonna, it's not gonna be any more than you can handle. If you make yourself available, I know that the great staff and will find something that's just right for you as a volunteer. So that's a really fun way to get started. And I've enjoyed the little moments where I reach out to some alums and have some good conversations that way. It's the extension of my UNH Phonathon process.
It all started there. Really.
Oh yeah, and students, there's probably none of those on here, but join the Phonathon. There's still a Phonathon, right? I think I get those calls. Yeah, but yeah, whatever you could do. I think it's really a fun thing. And I know personally, I'm more likely to respond to a text or an email from a peer and an alum than I read all the emails from UNH, of course, don't get me wrong, but I'm more likely to respond to a peer that way. So that's a great way to help.
And I think I'll just add, there are, in addition to the UNH Foundation Board, Debbie, I may get this number wrong, so correct me, but I think there are 22 advisory boards across the university. So depending on your area of expertise, your area of interest and passion, all of the colleges have their own advisory boards, different areas. We just started a UNH Sustainability Advisory Board for alums with that kind of expertise and passion. But is 22 the right number, Debbie?
It's yes. I'll say yes, Fiona, because you knew it. I'll say yes. So yeah, to Sarah and Allie's good point, we have many, many ways to utilize your talent, and we try to do it in a way that's not overwhelming. So we will do, follow your lead in how to get engaged, but there's lots of ways to do it if you want to. And I'm sure someone could put in the chat, one of my colleagues who's the brains behind all of this could put in the chat a great way to get in touch with us if you are interested in volunteering, because that is a wonderful way to engage. And yes, Allie, there is still Phonathon.
Yay. I don't know if are they still giving out pizza for making a lot of calls, because that was the best part.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
Involved, there's always pizza.
I don't know if they're if we'll be providing contact information too, but I just wanted to shout out that if anyone on the call wants to follow up about anything or ask any of these other questions, I would love to participate in that kind of conversation too.
That's very generous, thank you. And I know that Jen Woodside is saying that we will definitely send out this follow-up email, so thank you. We are sadly almost out of time, so I wanted to thank Allie and Sarah and Victoria, and of course my colleague Debbie for their insights and wisdom today, and for sharing some of your valuable time with everybody on this call. We will be sharing this webinar with anyone who wasn't able to join, or if you wanted to rewatch it. It'll be posted later in the UNH Alumni Webinar Library. That information and some other resources will be emailed out to you after today's event. And we certainly hope that you'll tune into some other webinars in the future. The alumni website and the alumni social media channels always have information about those events. I'll just say from my perspective, an event we have coming up on December the 2nd is with Tulane Montgomery, who is the co-CEO of New Profit Inc. They are an incredible venture philanthropy organization, and she's going to be talking about their model of what they call proximate funding, that they really believe in funding, as we were talking about today, this trend of, how can we really invest in the people who are the closest to the issues that are trying to solve, and how can we put our trust in them to really allow them to do the important work, and for us as philanthropists to sort of share the resources that make all of that possible. So I hope you'll join us on December the 2nd for that wonderful conversation with Tulane Montgomery, but also many other alumni webinars coming up in the coming months as well. So this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you again, Allie, Debbie, Sarah, and Victoria for being with us, and for all of the important work that you do every day to make the issues we all care about a little bit better. So thanks everyone for attending.
And
Thank you, Fiona.
Fiona.
Great job. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.